Okay, in this video I'm going to go into a composition that was always one of my favorites to do, a really simple composition, and it's going to be depicting I don't know, my version of a kind of an aurora borealis or a northern lights scene. I'm going to do this in largely kind of an emerald green color scheme, and I am going to be working through a range of greens. This one's actually black, but we have some variations of green here. And I'm going to start it off again with something nice and one of those slippery inks. This one's the Adirondack Light Seashells. I'm going to get a good base coat down here. I'm going to do the background first and stamp the imagery over the top of it. Alright, and I'm going to do this one in a portrait or vertical format here. This is a quarter page 4.25 by 5.5 piece of paper. And I'm going to get a good coating of this ink down because I have a lot of other inks to put on top of it. So I'm going to get a good base coat to kind of coat and lubricate the page's surface, and also some of this moisture from this ink will be penetrating the surface and getting the pulp of the paper somewhat saturated. Working through a range of tones, starting with the lightest one. Lightest one would be this one, but the lightest one of the Marvy Snow, and adding this in. What this is hopefully going to look like is these rays of light kind of going up into the sky. And again, the areas that I keep light are going to be the defined points of light through the use of, in this case, green values. Okay. Sometimes I'm going flat with the applicator, getting a good wide coverage, and other times I have it on its edge and I'm getting this thin area, and I just kind of stay on that area too. I don't just do one stroke, I'm kind of working it a little bit more. Okay. Working that coverage there. Going to my next color. By the way, that one was called light green. This one is a jungle green. If I don't have certain colors, then I'll just use something else. If you don't have a wide range of greens, what you can do is you can put down a blue and a yellow, and blue and yellow mix to form green. I can see this jungle green is kind of an earthy green tone. It's kind of knocking down some of the super hot brightness of the yellow green. Working into a fairly dark green. This one's just called green. And here we start moving into our darker tones, and really start to kind of define those rays of light. Okay, now at this point in time, when you move into the darker tones, be really careful not to go and streak across too much of your light areas if you want it to remain light. Okay, I really like these emerald green tones, these jewel-like tones that you can achieve with a variation of green. Okay, now I've covered up a lot of the lighter tones of green here, but remember these colors are all transparent. So if you see just the green by itself, that's what it looks like alone, and you can see how much more richer, deeper tone you get from that range of tones underneath there. So again, that's just the basic green by itself, so you can really see the difference. Okay, moving into the bottle green. I think the probably the darkest of the greens from Marvy. And sometimes the darkest of the greens, or darkest of any color, for me, in my usage of it, of that hue, just isn't dark enough. So, that being said, what I'm going to do is I have a dark brown here, and this dark brown is going to be a change of hue. And we're going to overlap it right over the top of that green. Maybe it'll give it kind of a richness to it than a straight green hue would provide. Alright. Okay. And if that's not dark enough, we can always go to the darkest colors. Switch papers so you can see what's going on here. Black. Let's hit those corners, the four corners, and the edges to kind of really frame off the scene. Okay. Maybe give a few streaks down here and there. Okay. Enough of that. Let's ink up. This is the Lakeside Cove Lg. Again, I've used this quite a bit. It's one of my favorite designs. There's a lot of bold shapes to it, and it'll hold up against a fairly dark background. And we'll just position this like about like so. Good even pressure. I'm actually standing up now to stamp this out. The paper is fairly wet, so I'm holding this down a little bit longer to transfer the ink onto the paper. And again, this is glossy cardstock that I'm working with. Okay, and we have our Lakeside Cove Aurora Borealis composition. And, okay, now, I mean, it looks okay as is, but I think we can really benefit from additional shadows. Probably a better idea to let this dry a little bit, but I don't have the luxury of that time right now. I'm just going to go straight into it and ink in these shadows. On the rocks here, I can see these shadows in these darker areas right here. I take my cue from the image itself, and I just darken up what's already dark in the image. I mean, that's not always what I do, but that's, I would say 90% of the time I just kind of go with the imagery. And if there's a darker area on the image, that's what I start off with my, that's where I start my shading. And I'm just going with, this is the bottle green again. It has to be a color that's as dark or darker than the background, so I mean it's not going to help me if I go in with something like this and try to add shadows down there. You're not going to be able to see any of it, so you have to go with something as dark. Okay. And see, I'm kind of adding this little streak of darkness across here. In my previous video I was mentioning lighting and having something kind of light and then go with a little bit of dark down below, or in the middle, and then have something light below, so it's like a light source and reflected light. And it doesn't have to be something like a water scene. You can have reflected light down on a meadow or a mountain or anything like that. Okay. A little bit more on in the sky here. Okay. And how about a little bit more black up top there. Okay. Well, I didn't know if I would add these in or not, but I don't know. Let's go with some additional foreground. This is the Reed's small stamp version. Okay, and let's put some finishing touches on this scene. White gel pen. Okay. Adding a few little stars in the sky. I'll show you something else that you can do with these stars too. I went into the white pigment ink in a previous video, but let's do something else with these stars using the pigment ink. On some of these stars, I'm making them a little bit larger. So you don't hit it harder, but you just kind of scribble on a little larger circle. And of course, if you have stars in the sky, maybe you have some of their reflections in the water, or maybe it's just a little sparkly light. They call it specular lighting in photography. A few little highlights on some of these rocks to bring them out. Not too many highlights in the shaded areas because you wouldn't have reflected light where there is no light. Okay, so if you can't see a rock, if it's too dark, then I wouldn't recommend putting too many highlights on it. But like I said, if you ever put something down that you don't like, just, rub it right off. Okay? Just about any part of the technique that I tend to do is, it's a very forgiving technique. My idea of fun isn't, sitting down to relax and do a bunch of stamping with, kind of a real precarious, technique, where you're kind of riding on the edge of, I don't know, success and failure. So anything's nice and develop slowly and incrementally. Here's the pigment ink. Alright, now here's what you don't want. Again, you don't want a big blob of ink like that, okay? What you want to do, let me take this pen this piece of paper, so you can see what's kind of going on. I'm kind of blotting off some of this ink right here, because I want a semi-dry application of this ink. And I just want this tip to be a little bit more frayed and soft, so kind of unravel that tip there. Alright, too much ink on there. So you just have to gauge. I mean, how much ink you take off depends on how, wet your pad is too with ink. If it's kind of a dry pad, then you might not have to take any off. Okay, and going around, tapping down lightly on some of these stars. Maybe I typically go for the bigger ones. I tap a little bit of ink around it. Not so much where you can't see that little white dot anymore, but where you can still, you're laying down kind of a translucent layer, a little ball of ink. And what you can, hopefully see in this video is you can see kind of a glowing star now. Alright? Where this might be good too is if you're doing a different scene, like a meadow or something, and you do a little ball like that. Like for example, if I ink this up with all these colors and I have these little specks of light and you kind of put a glow on them, they kind of look like fireflies. That's kind of a fun little technique to do. Maybe in this lighter area here, I can kind of tap around some of these trees, and it looks like the lighting, some of the lighting from the background is hitting the tree, and it's illuminating them on one side or a little bit. So anyways, here's what you can see right here, hopefully. Alright. So anyways, quick scene. Working through a range of greens, adding in some highlights there in the white gel pen, and finishing off with a little bit of a softer light. So it's kind of a